Allyson, and I am an archaeologist with the state of North Carolina. Today, I will be discussing a research project that occurred over the last 6 months in relation to a grant project with East Carolina University. Entitled Wrecked on Chicamacomico, an examination of the shipwrecks of Wimble Shoals. This paper will explore the stories of the ships that wrecked along the Rodanthe coastline of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Let's begin with probably the most famous wreck of the area, SS Merlo. Merlo was a British tanker that first launched during World War I. After completing a successful voyage to New Orleans from London, in August 1918, Merlo was on its return voyage loaded with oil. While off of the Wimble Shoals light buoy, the vessel was rocked by an explosion. Shortly after, 2 additional explosions occurred, splitting the vessel in 2 and causing gallons of oil to leak into the ocean, which soon caught fire. The crew immediately abandoned the vessel in 3 lifeboats. 1 got away, 1 was overloaded and started to drift, and the 3rd flipped while being lowered, leaving 16 men floating in the burning seas. On shore, the crew of the Chicamacomico life-saving station heard the explosions and immediately entered the water to provide aid. They soon reached the burning remains and rescued all but 9 of the men from the burning seas. They gathered the other 2 lifeboats and slowly transferred Merlo's crew ashore. The story of Merlo is only one of hundreds that occurred off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. This paper will be looking at approximately 200 wrecks that occurred between Oregon Inlet, right up here, and Gull Shoal Life Saving Station, just south of Salvo, right down here, and extending up to 30 miles offshore. The historical research and trends presented here was part of a larger project examining the cultural resources embedded in Wimble Shoals. We will be exploring what the individual stories of these wrecks are and how they contribute to a larger picture of wrecking events in the Wimble Shoals area. Before we get to the individual vessels themselves, we need to establish why wrecks occurred in the area around Wimble Shoals. While there are a multitude of reasons why vessels wreck, the environment does play a major role, which is evident in this particular case. The Outer Banks is a wave-dominated barrier island system extending over 300 kilometers, with Hatteras Island, right here, being one of the main islands at 80 kilometers in length. Directly off of the islands are large sediment deposits or sand holding areas called shoals. You can see them right here. These are created by sand being pulled off the beach by waves and carried in currents until the sand settles. Wimble Shoals is one such area. That one is right there. Named after James Wimble, an 18th century cartographer, the shoals sit over a historic cape called Cape Kenrick. Today's shoals consist of 5 ridges situated in a fan-like pattern, stretching 15 to 17 kilometers in length and 10 kilometers offshore. The other major component of the environment is the dueling currents, the Gulf Stream and the Labrador. The strong northbound Gulf brings warm air and water from the Caribbean up the coast, while the southernmost end of the Labrador Current brings colder air and water from Greenland. These 2 collide in this general vicinity, right in here. The meeting of these currents can cause dense fog, unpredictable weather, and bright and dangerous currents. With these factors in mind, we can now examine the vessels themselves. The area, as you may be familiar, is labeled the graveyard of the Atlantic for the vast quantity of vessels lost throughout all periods of time. As has previously been stated, the hydrographical and geological conditions of the Outer Banks played a major role in the loss of many vessels, leading to its name. Shipping itself also played a role. As visible in this image from 2012, there are thousands of vessels that are presently passing along the Outer Banks. This is similar to all phases of history. Reports from Connecticut around modern-day Avon from the 1800s indicate that one could look out and see almost 80 vessels on any given day passing the islands. As there are so many vessels passing, and given our time today, only 3 more wrecking stories will be told. The first is the Governor Ames. Built in 1888 in Maine, Governor Ames was the first 5-masted schooner to trade on the ocean. The schooner began its career working along the North American seaboard before traveling to Brazil, California, Washington, Australia, and London. Upon its return to the States, it spent the remaining 14 years of its life plying the entirety of the eastern seaboard. In December 1919, Governor Ames left Brunswick, Georgia, for New York with railroad ties. 2 days out of Brunswick, the vessel struck along Wimble Shoals in heavy seas. The heavy seas continuously washed over the vessel, breaking it apart, throwing the railroad ties everywhere, and sending crew overboard. All but one sailor was killed during the storm. He survived to tell the story of the loss of the Governor Ames. The second vessel is the Annie E. Blackman, a 3-masted schooner built in 1883 in New Jersey. Annie E. Blackman was employed in the coal and lumber trade. The schooner spent 6 years sailing in and out of the Atlantic seaports and luckily avoided any incidents which caused great damage to the vessel. The only account is a collision in 1884. In fall of 1889, this changed. Having left Philadelphia for Jacksonville, Florida with coal, the schooner was making good progress until it fell upon a violent storm near New Inlet, just north of modern-day Rodanthe. The vessel was driven toward shore and began leaking. All the crew was swept overboard and drowned, except the captain, who was wearing a cork life vest. The captain drifted toward shore and was able to tie onto a pole to stay near shore and afloat. At dawn, he made his way to the life-saving station, which unfortunately, due to the weather, was not able to see the wrecking event from the previous night. The final story is the weirdest of all, and that is of the George L. Fessenden. Another 3-masted schooner, George L. Fessenden, was built in 1874 in Maine. Over its 24-year career, the schooner traveled throughout the eastern seaboard and Gulf of Mexico, carrying everything from coal and lumber and stone to phosphate, molasses, and ice. The vessel had several strange occurrences during its career, including the loss of its entire cargo of molasses during a storm, and the disappearance of its captain following a delivery of coal to a psychiatric hospital. In April 1898, the schooner was loaded with crushed stone in Philadelphia for Fort Caswell in Southport, North Carolina. Soon after its departure, it put into Hampton Roads for unknown reasons. Upon returning to its voyage, it soon anchored 4 miles northeast of the Chicamacomico life-saving station. A passing steamer noted it had lost its foremast head and was flying a distress signal, but refused to abandon the vessel when offered help. While the station crew recall nothing of the sort. Soon a massive storm was raging, driving the vessel toward shore. 4 of the 7 crew members had drowned before the station crew were able to rescue them. Retrieving the 3 remaining sailors, they told the station that the captain had drowned, the ship was rotten, and they didn't know who their fellow sailors were. The 4 previously presented stories reflect both similarities and differences in their wrecking events. From the 200 additional vessels wrecked within the study area, these similarities and differences can be explored statistically and spatially to understand patterns in wrecking. The stories were examined for proximity to shore, temporal data, reasons for wrecking, and the direction of travel when the wreck occurred. Because of limited historical information, some vessels, 74 in particular, were not analyzed spatially. First, we will look at the proximity to shore. The information for plotting wrecks was based upon available geospatial and verbal descriptions of wreck locations in relation to features of shore. The data was split into 4 categories: shore to 500 yards. Offshore was considered ashore. 500 yards to 3 miles offshore was considered near shore. Beyond 3 miles was considered offshore, and unknown. Clearly seen in both the spatial and statistical breakdown is the approximately half of the wrecks occurred within 500 yards of shore. A quarter collectively between the near shore and offshore regions, and a quarter themselves were unknown. This distribution occurs as such likely because of the geological and hydrological conditions of the area. The Gulf Stream forced ships to sail closer to shore if they wished to avoid its strength, allowing the shoals to become more hazardous, particularly during certain weather conditions. Second, in looking at here you can see the wrecks broken down without the lines dividing them, with the green representing ashore and the brown representing near shore and the red representing offshore. Second, in looking at the temporal quantities of the lost vessels, they were examined in 2 ways, by year and by month. The yearly comparison, which you can see here, was conducted statistically by analyzing the data in decades and spatially by century, ranging from 1730 to 1979. Statistically, over 67% of the wrecks occurred during the 1800s, which here is represented in red. The wrecks of the 1800s show 2 groupings, around the 1840s and around the 1890s, which reflect both the role of storms and increased traffic. The 19th century wrecks are clustered towards the northern portion of the island, where there are more shoals present. The wrecks of the 20th century, represented here in green, occurred predominantly during the first 20 years of the century, and are clustered towards shore. The monthly comparison breaks the wrecking events down by month regardless of year. Statistically visible is that most wrecks occur during the first 3 months of the year, followed closely by the months towards the end of the year. There is a lull in the mid-year months. This corresponds with storm seasons, the nor'easter season between November and April, and the hurricane season between June and November. The third area of analysis is the reason for wrecking. There were 6 reasons assigned for wrecking, which were storms, groundings, stranding, war, collisions, and unknown reason. The categorization was based upon language found in historical resources. Of the 6 reasons, 3 each represented approximately a quarter of the data. storms, grounding, and unknown reasons. In spatially examining the placement of storms and groundings, both sets are clustered toward shore and diminish moving away from shore. The distribution is likely caused by a combination of northeasterly winds that blow during both tropical and extratropical storms, which drove ships toward shore, avoidance of currents, particularly the strong northbound Gulf Stream, and the avoidance of westerly and southwesterly winds, which whip around Cape Hatteras. The final area of analysis is the direction of travel during wrecking. 4 categories were noted for this area: northbound, southbound, westbound, and unknown. Based on the limited historical data, 42% of the data set did not have an assigned direction of travel and remained unknown. The remaining data showed that more were traveling south as compared to north when they were wrecked. Spatially, the southbound vessels are clustered toward shore as compared to the north when they wrecked, which are evenly spaced across the areas. This is caused by the southbound vessels avoiding the Gulf Stream. Breaking down the departure and intended ports, northbound vessels typically departed southern ports intended for the Mid-Atlantic region, and southbound vessels typically left the Mid-Atlantic ports for the southern ports. Overall, in examining the stories of 200 vessels, which wrecked around Wimble Shoals, certain trends are visible. Most wrecks wrecked ashore and diminish as they move away from shore. The majority wrecked during the 20th century or the 19th century due to the dangers of travel and the quantity of vessels on the sea. Most also wrecked during the latter months of the year, corresponding with early and latter months of the year, corresponding with tropical and extratropical storm seasons. There are no distinct reasons for why the vessels wrecked, nor is there a distinct difference in the direction of travel. Spatially, however, southbound vessels are found closer to shore than northbound. Studying the individual histories of these vessels of Wimble Shoals offer insight into larger patterns and the complexity of the region itself. I would like to thank Dr. Richards of East Carolina University for providing me the opportunity to work on this project, as well as Jill Hoyt, who received a grant from NOAA OER for the larger study that this came from. Thank you for listening to me today and look forward to answering all of your questions.